When you're querying, you want to use comps. People talk a lot about comps, and authors stress out a lot about comps. And the first thing that they usually tell me if I ask them, have you thought about comps? And they have, but they don't have one. They'll say, well, I wasn't able to find anything exactly like my book. So when you're doing comps, and some agents may feel differently about this, but the way I feel about it, when an author is including comps, it is showing me that you know the industry. If you're writing middle grade, for example, you've got some current appropriate middle grade comps that you're comparing your book to. And that tells me that you know the market. You're not saying like, this is where the red fern grows meets Harry Potter. Maybe it is, but I would say that most likely that's going to be a little bit of a stretch if you're using those two examples. But those two examples, as an example, would kind of tell me like, okay, or maybe raise some questions for me. Like, are you reading middle grade right now? Do you know what's selling? Have you done your research, that sort of thing. So when I'm looking at comps from an author, it's less of what I do as an agent when I'm using comps, and more for me to gauge whether or not you know your market, whether or not you've put thought into who's going to be reading your book, because that's really what you as an author should be doing when you're using comps. Who is the audience for your book? What book exists in the world that those readers are going to be clamoring to read your book? And so maybe it's, maybe it's not even a book. Maybe it's Stranger Things meets, another book or something like that. But it just is another one of those things that tells me more about your book, tells me more about you. When I use comps, I have to think very thoughtfully about the comps that I use, because editors look at my comps to say, or to gauge whether or not they think a book is going to sell. So if I'm using a comp, if I'm using a book as a comp that didn't actually do very well on the market, that's probably a red flag against the book that I'm trying to pitch. At the same time, if I use Harry Potter as a comp,
it's a very successful book.
Very successful book, but I would say any editor is going to look at that and say, really? So yeah, when I use comps, they need to be current. They need to be books that sell, and their ammunition, first of all, for me to get a book into an editor's hands, and hopefully they're appropriate, because an editor can then use them in front of the editorial board and say, this is last year's hot selling book in this genre, plus, this hot selling book club book, because, whatever, this is going to be a horror novel that book clubs can read or something like that. So that's an example of how my fun reading becomes work. Another thing too is when I'm pitching a project to editors, I want to see what those editors have been buying. So, if I've been reading the latest Paul Tremblay book and I think that I've got a book that's going to appeal to those readers, then maybe Paul Tremblay's editor is one of the people I should be sending it out to. And so staying up on what's selling and who's buying what, and actually being knowledgeable about those books all become things that I use in my day-to-day job when I'm working for my clients.
So is there a rule of thumb we could throw out, like you want a comp that's in the last 2 years, or?
Yeah, I would say that. You want something that's current. You want something that's not super obscure. And then I would also say temper your comps. If you really, really, really think your book is the next Harry Potter, go ahead and use Harry Potter as a comp. But I cannot tell you the number of times that I think I used this example in our chat at StokerCon. I was talking specifically about manuscript wish list, but I am constantly on the lookout for coming of age horror. I love coming of age horror. It is one of my favorite things. I love that in the 80s and the 90s, coming of age horror for an adult reader was a thing. And now a lot of it is shoehorned into YA. So what I would really love to see is coming of age horror for adults. So I put that out on manuscript wishlist, and I said, in the vein of Summer of Night, Stranger Things, and It. And I literally had somebody respond to my manuscript wishlist saying, well, I don't know any of the titles that you mentioned, and my book isn't horror, but I really wanted to pitch you my book about a 40-year-old man, you know, entering the dating scene. So if you pitch me a book about a 40-year-old man entering the dating scene and you tell me it's Hunger Games meets Harry Potter, then, you know, something's wrong. So I want them to be appropriate, but what they really should show me, again, is that you know your audience, you know the market. Yeah, they should be fairly current, and they should give me an indication of, you know, who's going to want to read your book. If it's Stranger Things meets Coraline, you know, then I want it to be Stranger Things meets Coraline. You know what I mean?
So a TV show or a movie could also be a comp then?
Or a video game. You know, it could be like Red Dead Redemption meets I can't think of there was like a werewolf movie that was really popular last year, but there's a new one coming out called Werewolves Within. So maybe it's Red Dead Redemption meets Werewolves Within, and it's literally like a locked room Western werewolf. That would be perfect. So, yeah.
Are you a gamer?
Not so much.
I don't know where you find the time with all the reading, and I know you're kind of a TV movie addict.
I am. I have gotten very involved in individual games. You know, I played Fallout for a while. I loved BioShock. There was another sci-fi horror game that I was really into. Lately, I've been Animal Crossing and Mario Kart and Dr. Mario, to be totally honest.
You've got a 2-year-old now, so you've got to you gotta be careful about what games you can play. I've got my games that are for after my son.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, my husband has those. But yeah, no, when I was playing Fallout, for example, I would get so invested in Fallout that I would literally just play it for hours and hours and get nothing else done. So at this point, I kind of recognize that I do that, and I don't really get super sucked into a video game if I know that I've got too much going on, and I generally have too much going on with a 2-year-old on top of work. So yeah, I tend to like just unplug, watch TV, and play Dr. Mario.
Very responsible.